Hi there, so I'm Brooke. I'm actually a PhD student at Hertford College, but I teach the undergrads here. I'm a lecturer in petrography, which just basically means I look at rocks under the microscope, and I am very enthusiastic about rocks. So you probably recognise this. It's the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It was built in the 1930s, and it's one of the architectural and engineering marvels of the world. What you probably don't realise, though, or you might not, is actually it was designed and built in England, in the northeast of England, in my hometown of Middlesbrough, by a company called Dorman Long. They also built Newcastle, the tying bridge there, and then the transporter bridge in Middlesbrough, which had this really unique lifting and raising mechanism until they welded it shut in the 90s. So a lot of the workers, well, pretty much all the workers were local, included several generations of my family in terms of both building the bridge and making the steel as well. But as well as the local men who worked on it, the iron that became the steel was also mined locally. And again, several generations of the other side of my family worked in the mines. So these are all mines. There's Middlesbrough. These iron mines were all over. And it was, up until the 60s, it was a pretty big industry in the northeast of England. So this is what the rest of the area around Middlesbrough looks like. These quaint little fishing villages, a beautiful coastline. And as a little kid, I used to really enjoy listening to my grandparents talk about what it was like working in the mines, and they would bring me, they would collected bits of rocks with the fossil in, and the ironstone is actually jam-packed with fossils. There's a beautiful clam there. It's about as big as my hand. So, and I always wondered where all of that iron came from, because it was concentrated in this one layer of rocks that was just jam-packed full of fossils. And there's some more of the fossils again. There's a type of clam there called pinna, ammonites, and even dinosaur footprints. So you can just see the footprint there, and there's a trackway left by a family of dinosaurs plodding across the ancient river delta there. So I was absolutely obsessed with fossils and rocks and natural history and finding out where it all came from. Where did the iron came from? Why did the shells on the beach look different from the shells on the beach that you find today? And I knew that I couldn't do anything else with my life when I became a grown-up other than be a geologist, and I was all set to do that. And unfortunately, I then went to secondary school, where I was told things like this. You see, because when you're a working class kid from a low-income household, that's the polite way of describing what my background is, you don't really get given many other options at school. So this is what I was told constantly for 5 years, and I left school with no qualifications whatsoever. I think actually I have a D in home economics, so I can make, a pretty average cheesecake. So what did I do? I worked in the crisp factory, and I can tell you with 100% confidence that Marks and Spencer's Finest are exactly the same as Tesco's own brand. We just changed the packaging. Warehouses, bars, and then call centres. There was me. That's literally me somewhere in there. I used to sell PPI, and then I used to do the PPI claims later on. And I remember at the time saying this seems like a scam, and they're going, no, it's not at all. And I got to my late 20s, and I just did not care about a damn thing, because I'll be honest with you, car insurance just isn't my jam. It's not very exciting, especially when you compare it to fossils and the like. So I have a friend who said, you can do this thing called an online degree, and you can get your geology degree, because you're always talking about rocks and you love it. And they were about to put the fees up to $9 grand a year, and I thought, well, it's now or never, so I'll use what little spare income I have. I'll stop going out on the lash all the time and partying, and at the weekend, and I'll get myself an education. And if anything, it'll be something to do on the weekend. And so I did, and they took me all over the world. Here's me in Morocco. You might notice I'm confused. That's because I'm looking at a tree full of goats. Because in Morocco, goats live in trees and birds live on the ground. And they said, you're quite good. You can do this thing called a PhD where we will pay you to look at rocks. And I was like, you what? Are you sure about that? And they said, yeah, you should go to Oxford. So up until that point, I thought Oxford was the set of Inspector Morse. I didn't know it was a real town. I thought they just filmed it in London. And they said, no, that's the kind of weird rocks that you're into. They study those at Oxford, so you should go there. So I thought, all right then. So I applied for 11 PhDs, and then I got one interview at Oxford, and then Oxford said no. But then they said yes. So I ended up at Hertford College there. And it's all really weird, and I had to go to the Sheldonian, and there was people shouting in Latin, and I was dressed as a wizard, and I didn't know what was going on. But then I went to the Department of Earth Sciences, and they were like, here's some rocks, let's have a look at these rocks. And then I ended up at Teddy Hall teaching the undergrads about how to look at these rocks, having a great time. But I always kept coming back to this question. Here's Old Nab, it's called, back in Stairs, back home. All of this is iron. Where's it coming from? How is it piling up in this, covering this large area of the northeast? Where did it all come from? And so that's what my research evolved into. So the iron is Jurassic in age. So here's Jurassic Yorkshire, and I've got my assistant is passing out, my colleague rather, passing out some rocks, some samples of the ironstone that I work with. If you'd have been on land, you'd have probably been eaten pretty quickly. And if you'd have been in the sea, you'd have probably been eaten very quickly. And so this is the kind of setting that the ironstone was getting formed in when it was iron mud. And here's an up-close-up picture of the mud. You can see it's made of all these tiny little grains, and in between them you've got sand, these red and green grains. So red, iron oxide, rust, but iron can also be green as well, especially if there's no oxygen there. So to understand rocks, you have to look at the rocks. So we look at them closely. So this chunk of rock's one of the ones that you're handing around there. And then we look at it even closer. Here's some of these grains. We call them ooids because they look like eggs, and apparently ooid is Latin for eggs. And you can see there's a lot of iron there. Gold-coloured minerals, pyrite, fool's gold, lots of iron, but also means you've not got much oxygen knocking about in the water while it's getting formed. So then we have to look at them even closer. So what we do is we slice rocks so they're about the width of a human hair, and we shine polarised light through them. So here's an ooid with polarised light getting shine through it. The white stuff is quartz grains, that's sand. And then you've got this lovely, and you can see it's got all of these laminae in it, so we call them these layers, like the rings in a tree. But this is a tiny grain that's 195 million years old, and you can see each layer as it grows. You can also see it's got this really squashed sort of shape, so it kind of looks like a cyclops eye. I call this one the Eye of Sauron, because it's like a weird little cyclops eye. And that means that when this grain was formed, and when it was compacted by the sediment after it was buried, it was actually really soft and gloopy. So that's really useful information to know. And each one of these laminae, it records a stage in its formation in the same way that you get information from a tree ring. So then we look at them even closer, and we get to the very limit of what we can see with light. So look up, you can see there's all these grains that were captured as this ooid was rolling around on the seafloor while it was still gooey and wet. And this is bits of shell and bacteria and algae and phosphorus and pollen. So we can't go any further with light, we have to use electrons. So we take the Eye of Sauron and we look at some of its laminations, and we can see that the different components are made of. We can see it's made of bertharine and greenolite, and these are types of clay. Bertharine is super common. Bertharine you'll be able to find in places like boots. It's the kind of clay that you'll put on your face if you want a nice, actually I don't know why people put clay on the face. If you're one of those people that puts clay on the face, it's bertharine. And basically what makes it good at whatever it is it does to your face is because it's got lots of iron in it. Greenolite's another iron clay. It's just a rarer one, and you can see that there's variations in them. Maybe this was seasonal, maybe it was on a daily basis, and then you can see you've got these little wiggles, and that's the traces left by bacteria. That's a little bacterial film that was building up on the surface of it there. We find other things in the sediment when we start to use electrons to look at things. So you notice there's this black smudge in amongst all of this sort of grainy texture. The grainy texture is clay and quartz sand. The black smudge is pollen. This is a 195 million year old conifer pollen spore. So we're in the sea because we had all those fossils of sea creatures, but we also know we're not that far away from land. So we're starting to build up a picture now. We're in the sea, we're not too far from land. There's dinosaurs and ichthyosaurs knocking about. The iron's got to be coming from somewhere, and it turns out that if you've got a tropical environment like Yorkshire 195 million years ago, you can actually, all of those trees and forests can pull the iron out of the ground and then put it into rivers and deposit it out to sea. But how do you concentrate that iron into a really thick layer that humans can then use years later? Well, we've got bacteria, so this is a fossil bacteria there. It's 3 microns across. What a micron's too small for you to really think about. So to put this to scale, if this was the size of a human, one of your hairs would be the biggest building on Earth. That's how big this is. It's about a quarter of the width of one of your hairs at its biggest point. We also find these little pyramid structures, iron pyrite. And if there's one thing that bacteria and iron pyrite love and where they like to grow, it's in organic matter. And the biggest pool of organic matter really in sediments is these things. And I'm sure you can guess what I'm about to describe this as just by looking at its shape. What we have here is a 195 million year old shrimp dropping. And as well as having bits of bacteria in it, for example, it's almost entirely made out of iron clay. And so those rocks that I'm handing around to you are essentially 195 million year old shrimp droppings. They used to fill their little burrows with their droppings to shore up the structural integrity against storms. The scratch marks there are the legs of the little shrimp 195 million years ago, digging away as it was looking for food. You see, what happens is they actually eat the food. Also, worms do this as well, and that is a worm, so whatever else you're thinking of, don't. And so they'll eat this iron-rich mud, and it'll sit in their digestive system and get fermented, and the iron will get concentrated, and then they'll poop it out the other end, as this. But then they'll re-eat it to get the extra nutrients that they missed the first time, and this will go on and on and on until eventually you've got a pellet that's almost entirely pure, undigestible, solid iron. And then they use that as a brick to make their little houses out of. So, recap. The iron's weathered dry land from tropical forest, washed out to sea, concentrated in the guts of ancient shrimps and worms, deposited by the shrimps and worms on the seabed, billions of shrimps and worms all over Yorkshire for hundreds of thousands of years, chewing and pooping and chewing and pooping, then buried and turned to stone over a 190 million year period, then lifted to the surface when the Atlantic Ocean formed and England was split and twisted and buckled upwards, and then eventually found by humans. Teesside and Cleveland iron was traded all over the world by the Romans, for example. It was really good quality for the time and they could work with it easily. Became an important source of iron for the Industrial Revolution. So there are warships and there are structures all over the world made out of Cleveland iron. And then it was found by the iron miners and turned into eventually steel, and then turned into the Sydney Harbour Bridge. 85% of the Sydney Harbour Bridge is actually Jurassic shrimp poo from Yorkshire. So eventually I did my PhD on where all the iron came from and found all of this out, and then went to visit the Sydney Harbour Bridge when I was helping my Australian colleagues find out where all of their iron came from, which is even older. It's over 1 billion years old, and that's some of the samples that you're holding there, 1 billion year old iron, which again is, we didn't have any shrimps then, but you had bacteria, and those bacteria were doing a lot of chewing and pooping of their own. And so that's how I ended up teaching kids at Teddy Hall about Jurassic shrimp poo and how you make bridges out of it. Any questions?